Good evening, everybody, and good to have you back. Today, I want to teach you how to estimate the value of an irrational number. So if you would, make this the title on the next open page in your math notebook. After you've written the title, you may put everything aside, empty your hands, clear yourself of clutter and any distraction, and turn that brain up to a level 10. And off we go. All right, for starters, I want to remind you how we estimate and deal with rational numbers. Remember, rational numbers can be, doesn't mean you know how to, can be written as a fraction. The way we'd put that on the number line or estimate where it was, or we'd come down here and say, okay, so that's going to be, I'm going to go over -1, and then I'm going to go over a little more, another 2/7. So it's going to be somewhere between -1 and -2. We would partition this into sevenths, 1/7, 2/7, 3/7, 4/7, 5/7, 6/7, and 7/7 would be the next number. So it would be like right there, -1 and then 2/7. This is not written as a fraction, but it can be. Same thing. That's between 0 and 1. And we would partition it in 6/10, so we'd partition it into 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 should be the next number. And so 6/10 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right there. Between 0 and 1, a little closer to 1. Here, this was between -1 and -2, a little closer to -1. And then this, you know, we haven't learned a process for writing repeating decimals as fractions, but they can be. And we would put that on here as well. 2 and 1/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, and it's right here. So irrational numbers we talked about yesterday. Irrational numbers are numbers that cannot be written as a fraction. There's no way to do it. So what they are never ending, and they are never repeating. They're decimals that don't repeat and they don't end. If they repeat or they end, they can be written as a fraction. If they don't, they can't. The only ones we've learned are either pi earlier this year. That is 3.1415926, blah, 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 blah. And any, what I've been calling before yesterday, messy square root. Any square root you don't know that's not a perfect square, like say the square root of 7. Like that'll be an irrational number. It won't end, it'll never terminate. And it's any of those. So the only really numbers that are going to be irrational are those, pi and the messy square roots. That's it so far. So let's talk about this. So I want to estimate the value of the square root of 70. I put this here to tell you just deal with the positive one. Remember, this would have a positive one and a negative one. So if I want to estimate the value of the square root of 70, that is not a perfect square. So that's going to be a messy one. And without calculating it, I want to talk about how to estimate it. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about what is between on the number line. So the square root of 70, what's it between? If I kind of make a number line, I'm dealing with the positive one, so I can stick with the positive numbers. If I kind of start to make my number line, I'll go out to 10 maybe. Here's what I can think to myself. Okay, well, square root of 70, not a perfect square. 8, I know 8 squared is 64. That's a little less than that. So I can think of 8 as being the square root of 64 on the number line. 8 squared is 64. It's more than that. It's also less than 9, because that's the square root of 81. 9 times 9 is 81. So it's between those. So I know the square root of 70 is somewhere between the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. So I know it's going to be between 8 and 9. That's the first part of my estimate. And then the next thing I'm going to try to figure out is which one's it closer to? Is it closer to 8 or is it closer to 9? Is it very close to 8 or 9? Or is it close to halfway? I'm going to choose one of these to kind of describe it. So I'm going to say it's between 8 and 9, which I can write in. And then I want to decide to say, is it closer to 8 or is it closer to 9? Or is it very close to 8 or very close to 9? Or is it close to halfway in between? So let's go back and think about that. If I kind of zoom in, I know it's between 8 and 9. I'm going to zoom in on my number line there. 8 and 9, right? This is the square root of 64. This is the square root of 81. And the square root of 70 is somewhere in between those. It is only 8 away from 64, and it's 11 away from 81. Right? If I add 6, I'll get there. If I subtract 11. So it's actually closer. I don't exactly know where it is here. Remember, we're estimating. But I think it's going to be closer to 64 than it is going to be to 81. Because I'm only 6 away here, and I'm 11 away here. So I would say it's between 8 and 9. And I would probably say it is closer to 8. I wouldn't say it's very close to 8. I would save that for something like the square root of 65 or maybe the square root of 66. I don't think 70 is super close to 8, but I think it's closer to 8 than it is there. It's also not super close to halfway either. Definitely like a pretty big gap in between. Okay, let me do another one. Same process. Estimate the value of the cube root of negative 900. Ugh. I don't know that cube root at all. So I do know it's going to be negative. And I do know it's going to be pretty negative. I know that the cube root of negative 1,000 is negative 10. So I think I'll go from 0 and I'll kind of back to negative 10. It's going to be over there somewhere. This negative 10, that's the cube root of negative 1,000. It's not super, I'm in that area. Next would be negative 9. Let's see what negative 9 cubed is. It's probably going to be in between negative 9 and 10, but let's see. Could be a 9. So let's see. 9 times 9 times 9 is 729. So that's the square root of negative 729. I indeed found the right place for it. Negative 900 is going to be between those somewhere. Oh, these are cube roots. I'm sorry. I've been writing square root. I apologize. So that's where I'm going to be. So it's going to be between negative 9 and negative 10. And what's it closer to? Or is it close to halfway? That's my other thing to figure out. Let's see. So I'm about 100 away from there. And I'm going to estimate, I'm about 170 away from there, if that was 730. So about 171 away from 729. So it looks closer to negative 10. Certainly wouldn't say it's very close to negative 10, but it's going to be closer. It's closer to that than it is to that. So it's probably somewhere around like right there. In between, but closer to that, a little farther from that. That's how you estimate it. Let's do a couple together. You can pause here and write this one down. Let's start by estimating the value of the positive square root of 200. All right, so I'm thinking through my list of perfect squares. That's not on it. So it's not going to be a clean one. That's not a perfect square. From my recollection, 14 squared is 196. Let me double check that. 14 squared. Yeah, is 196. And I think 15 squared is 225. So if I were to make my number line, I don't want to start all the way from 0. That's going to be annoying because I know it's way up here. So maybe I'll start at like 10 to help me think. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And so I start looking for ones I know, right? So 14, that's the square root of 196. 14 times 14 is 196. 15, that's the square root of 225. So I happen to know, remember I said a while ago, it's like nice to be familiar with or know your square root numbers. This is part of why. So it's going to be in there. So the square root of 200 is somewhere between those. So it's between 14 and 15. So now my question is it closer to, is it very close, is it close to halfway? So this is a lot closer to there than there. It's only 4 away from 196. It's 25 away from 225. So as I think about that, it's definitely closer to 14 than 15. It might even be appropriate here to say it's very close to 14. I'll leave that up to you if you wanted to word it this way or you wanted it to word it this way. For, if it was 197, I would definitely choose this. If it was 198, I would probably definitely choose this. I don't know when you switch from this to this. It's kind of your judgment. I would probably choose the top one here, but I wouldn't fault you either way. So it's between 14 and 15, but closer to 14. All right, one more. Pause and go back if you need to. Sorry if I rushed you there. Let's also estimate the cube root of -10. So we're dealing with cube roots. These get real big real quick. This is a pretty small number, especially for a cube root. So it's probably going to be fairly close to 0. It's going to be negative. So let me start from 0 here. I'm going to list these out. So -1, that's its own cube root of -1. -2, -2 times -2 is 4, times -2 again is -8. So that's the cube root of -8. Pretty close to that, actually. And then the next one's -3. If you cube -3, you get -27. So that -10 is between those two. It's between this cube root of -8 and the cube root of -27. So it's going to be somewhere in there. Past that, not as far as that. So it's between -2 and -3 for sure. And then I have to decide, is it close to halfway? Is it very close to 1? Or is it just close to 1? I would say pretty big difference here. It's only 2 away from -2. And it's 17 away from -3. So in this case, I would probably choose that one. It's very close to -2. So if I put that in the calculator, I would expect to see something like 2.1 or, and I know it's going to go on and on and on. It's going to be pretty close. Y'all, that is how you estimate the value of a square root or a cube root. It is really handy, since it's a never-ending decimal, to know about where to find it, if you know. Hope it made a super ton of sense to you. Hope you feel super confident that when you show up to class tomorrow, you're going to be all over this. If you need to go back and review 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the examples just to feel a little more confident, please do so. And I can't wait to see you tomorrow.